What if the warmest home ever built for one of the most brutal winters on Earth had no glass windows, no chimney, no modern insulation, and still kept entire families alive, generation after generation, for over 500 years? Not by burning more wood, not by wearing more fur, but through a system so precisely engineered that parts of it are only now being rediscovered by modern architects, and still not fully replicated. In the winters of Greenland and Iceland, temperatures regularly drop to -30, sometimes -40 degrees Celsius. Wind chill pushed that further. A single night exposed in the open was not a hardship. It was a death sentence. And yet, Norse families did not merely survive these winters. They lived through them, raised children, stored food, planned voyages, and built civilizations, inside structures that, from the outside, looked like nothing more than a grassy mound rising from a frozen field. Here is what we are going to uncover today. 7 secrets buried inside the Viking longhouse. 7 decisions made not by accident, but by a people who understood something about heat, about wind, about earth and cold that most of us have never been taught. And the last secret, the one hiding in plain sight above their heads, is the one that surprises engineers most, even today. For centuries, we have told the Viking story wrong. We remember the ships, we remember the swords, we remember the raids. But archaeology tells a quieter, more extraordinary story, one written not in blood, but in soil, grass, and carefully managed fire. Excavated Norse settlements across Norway, Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands reveal something remarkable. The building materials changed from one region to the next. The forests of Norway offered heavy oak and pine. Iceland had almost none. Greenland was harsher still, where driftwood carried by Atlantic currents was considered precious. And yet, across all of these places, separated by hundreds of miles of open ocean, the underlying philosophy of the Longhouse never changed. They did not try to defeat winter. They studied it, they understood it, and then, with nothing more than earth, grass, stone, and living creatures, they made it work for them. A child born inside a Viking longhouse in the dead of January did not enter a world of desperate cold. They entered a system. Every wall, every stone, every animal, every breath, all of it was working, quietly and constantly, to keep that child alive. That was not luck. That was design, and it began with something that doesn't look like engineering at all. To a modern eye, the walls of a Viking longhouse would have looked almost embarrassing. No stone, no brick, no timber frame visible from the outside. Just earth, just grass, just soil cut into massive blocks and stacked, layer by layer, until the walls reached nearly 2 meters thick in many recorded structures. It looked primitive. It was anything but. Each block of turf was cut from living ground, dense soil threaded through with the roots of grass that had grown for years, sometimes decades. Those roots did not die when the block was cut. They continued to grow. Slowly, season by season, they pushed deeper into the wall, stitching neighboring blocks together, sealing gaps that wind might have found, strengthening a structure that was never truly finished, because it was still alive. Archaeologists excavating the Longhouse at Stung, Iceland, buried and preserved beneath volcanic ash from the eruption of Mount Hekla in approximately 1104 AD, found turf walls that had maintained their structural integrity for nearly 1,000 years. Not because they were perfectly built, because they were built from something that kept building itself. But the more important truth about those walls was not their strength, it was their silence. Packed earth contains thousands of microscopic air pockets, tiny sealed chambers that slow the movement of heat the same way modern fiberglass insulation does. The wall did not just block the wind, it absorbed warmth from the fire, from the people, from the animals inside, held it, and gave it back slowly through the night. Engineers today call this thermal mass. The Vikings called it nothing, because to them, it was simply the way a wall worked. The Longhouse was not built on the landscape. It convinced the landscape to become part of itself. But the walls could only hold the heat that was already there, which means someone had to produce it. And the most powerful heat source in the entire Longhouse was not the fire. It had a heartbeat. Modern archaeology has confirmed what might seem, at first, deeply uncomfortable to contemporary sensibilities. During the coldest months of the Norse winter, People and livestock shared the same roof. Cattle, sheep, goats, sometimes horses, all of them living in the lower section of the longhouse, separated from the raised wooden platforms where families slept and ate, but never far. Never truly separate. A single adult cow produces somewhere between 400 and 500 watts of metabolic heat continuously, every hour, every night, without consuming a single piece of firewood. A small herd of cattle, in an enclosed space with thick turf walls, generated heat output comparable to a dedicated heating system. This was not a coincidence of circumstance. The longhouse was deliberately designed around it. The animals were positioned lower than the living platforms. Warm air, being lighter than cold air, rose naturally, drifting upward from the livestock section into the space where children slept and elders rested. No mechanical system required. No energy consumed beyond what the animals produced simply by being alive. And beyond the cattle, there were the people themselves. A Norse household under one longhouse roof could number 15, 20, sometimes more. Each body producing heat, each breath adding warmth, each life, quietly and constantly, contributing to the survival of every other. The Vikings understood something that took modern building science centuries to formally recognize. Warmth does not always have to be created from nothing. Sometimes, it only has to be shared. Heat, however carefully preserved inside those walls, faces one enemy that no amount of turf can fully stop: wind. Modern meteorological studies confirm what Viking builders discovered through generations of painful experience. At minus 20 degrees Celsius, a wind speed of just 50 kilometers per hour drives the felt temperature down to minus 40. The air itself does not change, but moving air strips heat from any surface it touches: human skin, wooden beams, stone, with a speed and completeness that still air cannot match. This is why every opening in the Viking longhouse was treated not as a feature, but as a vulnerability. Large windows were absent, not because glass was beyond Norse capability in every context, but because any opening was a liability the design could not afford. A darker interior was a deliberate trade: warmth over light, survival over comfort. The doorways were intentionally low and narrow, forcing anyone who entered to bend forward, slowing their movement through the threshold, and reducing the rush of cold air that followed them inside. Many longhouses included an entrance passage, a short corridor between the outer door and the main living space that functioned, in principle, identically to the airlock vestibules now mandated in passive house construction standards developed in Germany in the late 20th century. The Viking longhouse reached this solution approximately 1,200 years earlier. Not through theory, through necessity, through the understanding that the easiest heat to keep is the heat you never allow to escape in the first place. They had sealed the house from the world outside. Now it needed a heart, and the fire burning at the center of the longhouse was nothing like the fireplaces most of us have ever known. There was no hearth tucked against a wall, no cast iron stove, no chimney carrying smoke efficiently skyward. Instead, a long open hearth ran along the central axis of the longhouse. In larger structures, this fire stretched 9 to 12 meters, a continuous line of heat rather than a single point of warmth. It was a furnace, a kitchen, a workshop, a gathering place, and something else entirely: a thermal battery. Surrounding and beneath the flames, large stones absorbed heat hour after hour throughout the day. When the fire burned low in the deepest hours of the night, those stones did not cool quickly. They continued radiating warmth steadily and slowly into the living space, maintaining what researchers modeling Norse domestic environments at the University of Iceland have estimated as interior temperatures of approximately 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, even when outside temperatures fell to minus 20 or below. Fuel itself varied dramatically by region. In the forests of Norway and Sweden, hardwoods burned long and hot. In Iceland, peat cut from wetlands became the primary fuel source, a resource that burned differently, slower and smokier, requiring adjustments in how the hearth was managed. In the most resource-limited settlements of Greenland, dried animal dung was not a last resort. It was a calculated and necessary part of the fuel strategy. Nothing that could produce heat was dismissed. Nothing that carried warmth was wasted. And then there was the decision that surprises people most: the choice the Vikings made about smoke, because they did not try to remove it. They kept it. To modern instinct, smoke inside a home sounds like failure. like something to be solved, vented, eliminated as quickly as possible. The Vikings made a different calculation. Smoke rising from the central hearth did not rush immediately outward through a chimney. It rose slowly beneath the high roofline, gathering into a warm layer that sat between the living space below and the cold air pressing down on the roof above. That layer was not waste, it was insulation. A thermal blanket of heated air, sitting precisely where heat loss was most dangerous, at the highest point of the structure, where warmth naturally migrates and most easily escapes. Ventilation existed, but it was controlled. Adjustable openings near the roof ridge could be widened during cooking or warmer weather, then narrowed to near closed during the coldest nights, slowing the escape of warmth to a deliberate trickle rather than a flood. But smoke performed a second function that archaeologists have come to appreciate deeply. The fine particles of soot that settled continuously onto the timber beams and roof supports created a dry, protective coating across every wooden surface they touched, discouraging insect activity, inhibiting fungal growth, and sealing the wood against moisture penetration. Timber analysis from excavated structures at Stong in Iceland and Borg in the Lofoten Islands of Norway suggests that roof timbers treated continuously by smoke in this way achieved functional lifespans that may have extended to several centuries. Not because the wood was exceptional, because every fire that kept the family warm was simultaneously preserving the building around them. What looked like pollution was, in precise and measurable terms, preservation. The Vikings did not tolerate smoke. They understood it. Above the smoke, above the people, above the carefully managed warmth of the longhouse interior, sat the roof. And the roof was perhaps the most quietly brilliant element of the entire system. First came the framework, heavy timber beams strong enough to carry extraordinary weight. Over those beams, builders laid sheets of birch bark. Rich in natural oils, birch bark formed a waterproof membrane that protected the wooden structure beneath from rain and the slow, destructive penetration of snowmelt. Then came the turf, layer upon layer of thick sod, stacked until the roof carried a weight of several tons. That weight was not a burden, it was a tool. It compressed the entire structure downward, tightening joints, increasing rigidity, and making the longhouse dramatically more resistant to the sustained force of North Atlantic winds that could strip a lighter roof entirely from its frame. And as with the walls, the roof did not stop changing after construction ended. Grass continued rooting into the turf. Season by season, living roots stitched the layers together, sealed the smallest gaps, and protected the birch bark beneath from the degrading effects of ultraviolet light and surface erosion. Then winter arrived, and it brought one final building material: snow. Fresh snow contains up to 95% trapped air by volume, giving it insulating properties that polar researchers and cold climate engineers still reference today. As storms buried the longhouse beneath accumulating drifts, pressing against the walls, piling across the roof, sealing every small gap the grass roots had not already closed, the structure did not weaken. It completed itself. From a distance, the longhouse disappeared. Only a low doorway and a thin thread of smoke rising into gray winter sky revealed that anything lived beneath that white and frozen landscape. The house had not been buried by winter. It had been finished by it. We began with a question that seemed almost impossible. How did a home with no glass windows, no chimney, no modern insulation keep entire families alive through winters that would defeat most modern unprepared people within hours? The answer was never a single invention, never one brilliant decision made by one brilliant mind. It was a system, 7 layers of thinking, each one supporting the next, each one ensuring that the warmth generated inside those walls traveled as short a distance as possible before being captured, stored, shared, and used again. The turf walls held it, the animals produced it, the narrow doors protected it, the stones remembered it, the smoke preserved both it and the building around it. The living roof completed it, and winter itself, the great enemy, became the final layer of insulation that sealed everything in place. Modern architecture is still catching up. Passive house design, earth-sheltered construction, green roofs, thermal mass engineering. Every one of these disciplines is, in some form, rediscovering what Norse builders worked out through generations of living, failing, rebuilding, and observing. They did not leave us equations. They left us something harder to teach and more valuable to learn: a philosophy. The Vikings didn't leave us ships. They left us a way of thinking, a way of understanding that true innovation is not always about generating more. Sometimes, perhaps most of the time, it is about wasting less. The Longhouse was not a primitive shelter. It was a machine for preserving life. And the people who built it were not simply surviving winter. They were thinking further ahead than most of us ever do. But the Longhouse was only half the story. Because while the Vikings mastered surviving the cold on land, they were solving an even deadlier problem on open water. And the ship they built to face it was an engineering answer just as extraordinary as the home they left behind.